Welcome to another episode of Coach's Corner University. With me, as always, we have Paul O'Need. What's going on, buddy?
Not too much, man. Having a good time up here.
Your beard is looking very full right now. I'm very impressed by it.
I'm trying to get it to grow up to my eyes.
It's a feat that is not that hard to do, believe it or not. I have hair that grows up to my eyes if I'm not careful.
There's a good amount there. I just have to let it grow in, and then my goal is to connect it directly from like sideburn to mustache, and then shave everything else.
It's not bad. I like when the beard connects to the back of the neck hair. It's so overgrown that it starts to connect and you just don't know where it ends and where the other one begins. To me, that's like the sign of a true man.
It's getting there.
Yeah.
I think peak performance might actually be the neck beard into the chest hair.
Whenever
there's no separation there, that might actually be peak masculinity, I think.
There was what is that called when you have just the neck beard?
It's just the neck beard, and they're so bad.
Josh Thompson, a UFC fighter, used to rock the neck beard all the time.
And
obviously, and he was a badass fighter, but man, it was different. Put it that way.
I love it when fat guys have it and their like cheeks are super fat, but then they have all this like fur. It's like their chin needs protection against friction from their fat. You know what I'm talking about.
Well, I feel like there's certain hairstyles that.
Is that my house? I think that's my house. Pay no attention to that.
Are you cooking something?
No, I'm not cooking anything. I think they're doing a test or something.
Oh.
You guys continue on with the conversation. I'll be right back.
Oh, well,
I love that he didn't mute his thing. Well, in any case,
either way, yeah.
Facial hair is great. Bryce, how are you doing?
I'm good. I guess I can go ahead and use this opportunity to introduce myself, right?
Absolutely. Like I've actually never met you. I've followed you online for quite a bit, and I know we have a lot of mutual friends. So I'd love to know kind of more about you and your background. Where are you coming up from?
Yeah. So I'm originally from Houston, Texas. I went to college at Ohio State. So I've been in Columbus since 2011. I just decided to stay here after college. Kind of bounced around, worked at private gyms, did the strength and conditioning stuff for a while. Kind of realized that strength and conditioning, while it was great, I loved working with sports teams. I loved working with the athletic side of it. Wasn't necessarily like my forte, wasn't really my niche, my passion. I decided to kind of break off, do my own thing for a while. Took a little bit of time for me to actually find what my niche was, I guess. But like you said before we got on the podcast or before we started recording, my background is more in like physique sports and bodybuilding and hypertrophy, I guess, style training. So that's what I've been doing since I was in high school. I've tried pretty much any method that you can think of. I've followed pretty much any person that has ever written the word hypertrophy. So I have a lot of like anecdotal experience, and then I'm, I guess, more recently getting into developing like really solid connections with people. And then like, I have Danny LaMartina, who is now working with me, and being around people like that is awesome for me. So my company is slowly growing, and we have a lot of athletes that we work with as well. Most of them are physique athletes. So yeah, I think that it would be kind of an interesting little trichotomy right here, right? Between the three of us, with you guys being a little bit more strength oriented, and I think me being a little bit more bodybuilding oriented in our past and our history. So be a cool little change up, I guess.
Oh, for sure. And like I find this is going to lead into our first question. But I find that the transition between both sports, like, I don't want people to get it twisted. Like, you might be training for hypertrophy, but you're fucking strong.
Yeah.
And that always plays a part, right? Because the more weight you can move, the more stimulus you're going to create. So there's definitely an interplay there. So yeah, Tony, we just introduced Bryce while you were tending to your emergency. Oh my God.
You guys go into the question. This should stop here soon. I don't know what's going on.
So the question was relating to training alone and training. I think we can go in general from both powerlifting and a bodybuilding perspective, but how do you mentally break through when training alone? And the word used was the glass ceiling, which I think we can all both categorize as that kind of mental oh shit switch, right? Getting away from that fear of the barbell. And I know from a powerlifting perspective, we're not taking maximal attempts in training often or at all. So the program will dictate that the weights you've done in the past or the reps and training you've done in the past should have prepared you for the reps that you're performing in the gym now. So you can very much lean on evidence when it comes to, should I be afraid of this? When it comes to training alone for powerlifting, as long as you have the safety set, you're not going to hurt yourself for the most part, unless you perform the rep, absolutely terribly, or, you're not listening to your body between sessions and you make some incorrect jumps. You should be prepared for the training that you're going to be doing. One thing that I think Bryce can really elaborate on is I've been venturing more so into hypertrophy style training very much closer to failure. With upper body stuff, it doesn't seem to be an issue, but especially with lower body stuff where I haven't had the opportunity to be externally stabilized because I just didn't have access to the equipment, I get on a leg press. And so this morning I got on the leg press. Last time I did a leg press, I did 8 plates for 15 reps and it was relatively challenging. This morning I got on the leg press. I put on 9 plates. I was like, I'm going to try and get 15 reps again. I got 15. It was hard. I racked it. I'm like, I legitimately could have done 5 to 8 more reps there, but it was awful and it was so hard, but the sled was still moving. So I said, okay, I'm supposed to do a down set. I'll take 2 plates off, but I'm going to do them all paused. So I did them all paused. I got 20 reps and it was awful and it hurt, but I got off. I'm like, I legitimately could have done 5 to 8 more reps. And it just seems like that's the recurring pattern with me because I just don't know legitimately how close I am to failure. And I don't want the sled to fall on me, obviously. But it almost seems like in powerlifting, you're going to be in pain, but it's over quick. That discomfort is quick. Whereas I find in bodybuilding, the more time you spend in that discomfort, that's where you're really going to, as cliche as it sounds, like unlock the real, growth, right? That's where you have to go.
Yeah, and building off that, I think that training in bodybuilding rep ranges or with that style of training, or that intention, it requires a different kind of psychological resiliency, I guess is a really good way to put it. Because like you said, there's a very big difference between an 8 RPE with, a 3 rep max and an 8 RPE with a 20 rep max.
Right.
Like if we're talking about that, because whenever you're doing something like a leg press, and leg press is always my favorite example to illustrate the differences between this stuff, or illustrate the differences between, reps and reserve style training, or just what a rep and reserve is. Because with something like a leg press, like what you mentioned, it sucks at 10 RIR. Like it's just all shitty. It doesn't feel good. And you can continuously just push and push and push because there is that internal stability within the machine. There's the pain associated with it, but it's not a failure pain. It's more of like okay, this really sucks, but I can pause, catch my breath, and get 2 or 3 more. Do it again, get 2 more. Do it again, get 1 more. But having to transition, I think, from lower rep ranges into high rep ranges, typically, going from squat, bench, deadlift, you would not just go to a set of 15 on a squat. You're going to transition into something that's a little bit more stable, that allows you to exert that force a little bit more directly, like a leg press, like a hack squat, like a pendulum squat, something like that. At least if you're programming intelligently, most people aren't going to do low bar squats for sets of 15. But again, that's just such a different requirement. So there's not going to be the failure points outside of your quads, and whenever your quads fail, you're done. But being able to judge that point it's a moving target at first, because you're going to be adapting, and you're going to be getting better at reps for probably like 4 to 6 weeks before you actually start to figure out where your effort and your abilities lie. So for me, working mostly with physique athletes, that's something that a lot of my clients already have kind of intrinsically built. Like they know about where like, their 8 rep max, their 10, 12, 15, 20 rep maxes on a movement. But I think that like what you said, the transition from a strength athlete going from even like a peaking cycle into like off-season work, it's a clusterfuck. You have no clue what's going on, right? Like you just don't know what your capabilities are at that point. So I think that it almost might be beneficial to not even try to worry about like what your RIR is at the time. It's like this is going to be a moving target for a few weeks, just understanding that. Because like you said, like whenever you go from doing like sets of 5, sets of 6, even 8, and trying to go up to 15 to 20, like it's just so different. It's indescribably different.
Yeah, I've kind of taken the approach personally to just, as long as I'm doing a little bit more than I did the previous week, then I'm taking steps forward. Eventually, I'm going to get to that point. I think that the challenging part is like, it sucks when I get 10 reps left in the tank. It sucks, and it's not like I'm using 5 plates aside or 4 plates aside. Like it's still quite heavy. Like it's 8, 9, 10 plates. So it's going to be uncomfortable, and just being more aware of that and just pushing a little bit more every time I touch that movement and hoping for the best, and hopefully I get bigger. So far so good. Actually, my training feels fucking awesome right now. So it's going well. But Tony touched on a point, like we always like to bring it back to the research, like what the research says, because it always gives us a leg to stand on when it comes to, starting points and explaining pivot points within the process of like, I'm seeing this, is this what the research says should happen, or et cetera. And the idea that people are terrible at judging their reps in reserve, and knowing the difference between, say, 3 reps in reserve on a set of 10 versus 3 reps in reserve on a set of 20. Knowing where that is that's really where people struggle. So I'm wondering, in your programming with people, how do you adjust do you program with the reps in reserve, or do you program more so like just hit as much weight as you can for this rep range and go complete failure?
Is that towards me?
Yeah, it's towards you. Yeah.
Oh no, so I definitely reps in reserve, definitely.
Okay.
I think that it takes a very specific type of person to be able to get the prescription of take everything to failure and then actually be able to do that, and not just do it, but do it week in, week out, and progress on that, right? I think that for 99% of people, giving them the built-in progression of, okay, we're stopping this a little bit short of failure this week with the intention of kind of like what you said, just do a little bit more. Eventually that moving target starts to get more and more and more precise. And all of a sudden you're not 10 reps short of failure. All of a sudden now you're 2, 3 reps short. Eventually you'll hit failure if you just keep doing that. But it's more about like, do you really want to do progressive, like adding 10 pounds to the bar this week, add 10 pounds to the bar next week, add 2 reps this week? Most people don't have that type of attention span. So that's where you start running into problems as well. But for me, I found a lot more success in keeping my athletes motivated and healthy. And also there's an aspect of, you don't want your clients to feel like they're failing if they can't hit a rep target or a weight target week after week. So this is something, especially with working with women, that I found. Women tend to actually be harder on themselves than men whenever they quote unquote fail at something, right? But with working with a lot of women, you'll see that like if you give them a rep prescription, you're like, hey, make sure that you get 8 reps on this top set, and they get 7, it'll ruin their whole day. Like what the fuck? Like what the fuck did I do? What did I do wrong? Like I couldn't get that rep target that you wanted me to get. So I've found that it's almost better to be a little bit conservative, leave that room for progression, a little bit of room under the ceiling, and allow your clients to work within that. Push up towards the ceiling every once in a while, come back down a little bit more every once in a while. But in my opinion, continuously training at full throttle and just redlining it all the time, you're eventually going to get hurt, especially whenever you're doing things in bodybuilding rep ranges. I think the margin of error is a lot less whenever you're adding in like the cardiovascular component, and you're also adding in the just general fatigued state of being at like you said, 10, 12, 15 reps into a set and you can't breathe and everything is shaking. It's like, are you really focusing on like making sure you're stable in the bottom of a squat at rep 16? You're just trying not to die. So those things start to come into play as well. It's like you tend to see less massive acute injuries, but more just like random back tweaks, random knee strains, random bullshit that happens whenever people are just not cognizant of what's going on during their sets. So in my opinion, like I said, my experience, I think that it's almost universally better to train with reps in reserve and just be more cautious, because most people don't know how to auto-regulate themselves whenever they're told to train to failure every set. It's just, in my opinion, I don't think that's a great prescription for everyone.
So to kind of play devil's advocate a little bit with the idea of reps in reserve versus training to failure, if you look at the literature on muscle unit recruitment, right, the idea is to be able to recruit as much muscle fibers as possible. And the closer you get to failure, the closer you are going to be able to recruit those motor units, right? And the more we can recruit, the more adaptation we're going to bring upon, the greater the stimulus. So if the idea is to train closer to failure, to get as much stimulus as possible, and then also looking at the literature when it comes to higher rep sets, if you look at the higher rep stuff, the further away you are from failure, the less the stimulus is going to be. So say you're doing a reps in reserve of a 3 for a heavy set of 8, that's going to create a better stimulus than if you did a reps in reserve for 3 for a set of 20, because the likelihood of them actually getting to that reps in reserve 3 is going to be significantly off, right? Because it's harder to judge where failure is on higher rep sets. So they may be more at a reps in reserve of 6 or 7. And then they're missing out on a lot of the muscle recruitment because the weight's not heavy enough to elicit that adaptation. So if you have them training to failure on a consistent basis and you just adjust the volume to allow for a progression, and that you fully understand that if there's not progression to be made, then that could be something indicative of their lifestyle that needs to be changed. It could be something indicative of the program being off, right? But if there's so much room left with reps in reserve for them to continuously make progress, maybe those first 3 to 4 weeks, they're actually not doing anything to create an adaptation. They're not creating a novel stimulus because they're so far under. So then you're thinking, well, these next 5 to 8 weeks are the weeks that they're actually going to make the stimulus because they're actually getting closer to failure, when you could just start from the very beginning and you just undulate their total volume within that set. Because obviously the closer to failure you get, the less sets you're going to need, right? So that's the way that I look at it in terms of why failure training could be beneficial, right? If we find that maximum adaptive volume that people feel like they garner the best and most optimal results, why not stay in that range, right? It's like this idea that there's a minimum adaptive volume and then a maximum, and you have to start from the bottom and work your way to the top, when it's like the bottom doesn't really give you much. The top is going to get you closer to injury. Why not stay in the middle where you have optimal growth and just find that range and just train that to failure, as long as the exercises are, fully externally loaded so that they don't have to worry about stability and things like that, right? I don't think barbell movements are the greatest for failure training by a long shot, for several reasons, but beyond the fatigue dynamic and the ability to stabilize in a fatigue state. I just feel like it's just, I don't know, it's just something that creates such inaccuracy in execution of movement that it just seems like, what's the point of doing it, right? Anybody that squats or bench presses or deadlifts high reps to failure, 90% of them are going to tell you their joints hurt more than their actual muscles hurt at the end of that workout. And that's just because their technique starts to break down the closer they get from cardiovascular failure and from muscle failure as well. So I tend to lean towards more of the training to failure and then just limiting the volume so that they're continuing to progress week to week. I think that it gives them goals every week to beat the logbook, as long as execution is like perfect. And I think that allows them to go in there with a mindset of like, once I beat that logbook, then I know that I've done everything. I ticked all my boxes. And most people that get into strength sports or hypertrophy sports at a high level are type A personalities, where they want to continuously think, I did everything I could that day and I checked all my boxes. Where you have someone who's a type A and you're like, week one, we're doing reps in reserve of 5. They're gonna be like, I feel like I didn't even have a good workout, you know? So I think there's something to be said about both camps. I just prefer the one where you're training to failure and you find that optimal volume capacity and you just push that on a consistent basis. And maybe you have a rotation of exercises that allow for variation so that you're continuing to create adaptation for hypertrophy purposes, instead of just doing the same thing over and over again. But I think there's something to be elicited out of that as well, right? If you can continue to progress with the same things, that's telling you that everything else is on point, right? And I think being able to train to failure is going to give you more biofeedback for that athlete than reps in reserve. You may not know exactly what's going on with that athlete until you get closer to those failure points, and then you have to make adjustments. And it just seems like there's a lot of lost time in that aspect.
So how would you deal? So my thought with that is any stimulus that's novel is going to be creating an adaptation. So if they're not used, if every week, even though they're using a reps in reserve system, quote unquote reps in reserve, like we'll assume they're kind of close. If they're always handling weights they've never handled before, should be a pretty good indication that they're adapting. How would you teach a lifter, keeping in mind we're all coaching in the online space, how to go to failure? Because I totally thought with 9 plates in the leg press, I was going to find failure this morning.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. And I would just say that what you said is somewhat true and then somewhat false as well, right? Yeah, if you go from doing singles to doing higher reps, that's a novel stimulus. But if there's so little load and there's so many reps in reserve, it just seems like it's a wasted opportunity more than anything, right?
Okay,
I don't think a novel stimulus should be the only goal in
right.
terms of, right.
So sorry, I should provide context. So I'm pushing towards what I would consider failure, but that point just keeps going up because I genuinely have no idea. So like, do you program with that in mind, or do you just say, you know, I want you to fail between 10 and 12 reps on this exercise?
Yeah, I would definitely think about giving them a rep range to fail in, and then they just do feeder sets up until they feel like that's their rep range. So say if they have a rep range of 6 to 8 reps that I want them to fail in, and they hit 12 because they weren't able to gauge their reps properly or their weight properly, that just lets them know that next week they can add a little bit more weight to get closer to that 6 to 8 rep range. But it gives them a starting point, right? And it gives them a solid starting point of making sure that you're getting all those motor units all recruited to create the most possible stimulus that you can, right? And then they can continue to progress from there. So as long as say you start them off with 12, they have a lot of wiggle room to continue to add either weight or reps, but they can go all the way down to 6, right? And still elicit hypertrophy. So that can be a 12 to 15 week program that you're giving them training to failure just by adding 2.5, 5 pounds each week to the same exercises and slowly going from trying to meet 12 every time. But if you hit 11, you hit 11. If you hit 10, you hit 10. And then if you keep going down, right, but you're training to failure every week, you know, with 1 to 2 sets, whatever their volume, whatever their recovery allows them to do, to me, that's going to be a more optimal approach in order for them to, 1, fully get as much adaptation as possible out of the movement. And then 2, it just gives them a better mental approach, kind of the opposite of what Bryce was saying. To me, it gives them a better mental approach of showing up to the gym, making sure that everything's perfect because they know they have to hit that logbook and they know training's going to be fucking hard. So they're showing up ready to go. Whereas if there's reps in reserve, it's like, I mean, you've seen guys train with reps in reserve. It's like, oh, I just did it. And it's like, oh, I racked my weight. It's like, they didn't even look like they did anything. You know, do they still make progress? Sure. But, and I know anecdotally people don't like that, but if you look at anyone on the Olympia stage, they're not training reps in reserve. They're training to all out failure. There's a reason for that. There's a recipe in there that tells you failure training is the way to go. Some accumulate it by doing a shit ton of volume to failure, and some accumulate it by training as heavy as possible with minimal volume to failure, but they're all training to failure.
Want me to go on that?
Yeah, for sure, man.
Let's do it.
So, so just a couple points there. So my first one would be, I always really hesitate to like look at someone like people on the Olympia stage to judge based on like, and try and translate that to the masses, because whenever we're talking about like the 0.001%, like they could walk down the street and their legs are going to get bigger. So it's like, I struggle to correlate those two. I get what you're saying. At the same time, like look to people that have been successful and try and translate, you know, what they've been doing down to everybody else. My opinion has always been, what is the best long-term model to get people from point A to point B in one piece, while also being able to manage, you know, nagging injuries, manage recovery, manage cyclical dieting that goes on with everybody, especially competitors, up and down through prep, and also manage just in general exercise variation too. I think that's a really big one. Kind of Paul touched on this as well, where whenever you're introducing novel stimuli, it anecdotally, it fucks you up, man. Like for me, leg press is a great movement for me. I have pretty shitty knees. Doing any kind of like, you know, heavy barbell squatting I can do for a few weeks in a row before I start getting some like really, really negative feedback from my tendons and shit like that. So for me, the best movement I've found is actually a Cybex squat press. It's perfect for me. I can push super hard on it. I don't get any knee pain. I can push to failure on it and I'm fine. I'm very comfortable. I mean, not comfortable, but you know what I mean? Like it doesn't fuck me up. But again, anecdotally, switching from something like that to even a regular linear 45-degree leg press, it's a substantially different stimulus, and it will fuck me up for days if I try and use the same intensity and the same rep ranges on something as similar as that, but they're also different enough that that novelty creates a gigantic disruption. And I think for me, whenever I'm programming for a lot of my clients, I take that into account, kind of like what Paul says, where a lot of these things are moving targets. And whenever, even though you've had a client working with, let's say again, a leg press is always a great example for this. They've been working with a leg press for the last 12 weeks. They've been taking top set to failure, down set to failure. They've made great progress on it. Eventually, you're going to switch them off that leg press as the main movement, in theory, right? Like they're not going to do that for infinity. So let's say they go to another quad-based movement as their main progressible top set, down set movement to failure. In my opinion, starting them at a failure point is going to almost do more damage than if you were to just say, hey, let's find a baseline this week. And then next week, let's try and beat that baseline. Take it to failure if you want to. But again, I think that whenever you're learning a movement, even though it is a machine-based movement, there's not the technical component. Like if you're squatting, even something like learning how to take a hack squat to failure, it's different. It's so different. And this is coming from like, you know, obviously like a bodybuilding background. Mm-hmm. The mentality that you have to take these different types of even machine-based movements that close to failure or even beyond, it's learned. It's a skill. It really is a skill. So, so my thought process, and this is actually funny because I do implement top set, down set with a lot of my clients. But it's usually using that as a base of progression and being able to manage recovery based on the progress and the performance of top set, down set within that movement pattern or within that training session, and then filling in the gaps with volume around that. So go ahead, Paul.
No, I just, sorry to interrupt. It kind of like, I see the parallel to be drawn, right? So you push the progression as far as you feel like it can go, and then you switch the movement, which is often what we do in powerlifting when we go from like, you know, an assistance movement with a specialty barbell or something like that.
Right.
You almost use that first week or two as like a pivot week where it's inherently a deload because they can't push as hard on that new movement because that moving target is there. So you've kind of built in this deload where they still feel like they're training really hard, but in reality, they're just learning the pattern so that the next week they can just push it harder. Is that kind of what you're doing?
Essentially. And I don't think it has to be necessarily pertaining to new movements either. I think that you can recycle the same movement for as long as you want to. And I've done this with clients where I have them run the same main movement for 8 months in a row, because if it's working, you don't have to switch off of it. But just understanding that as they stick with that for longer and longer and longer, they're going to get better at pushing that movement. So the longer someone stays with the movement, the more that I start to err towards just take it to failure.
Right.
Because anything less than that, you're so good at this movement, it doesn't matter anymore. Like, we know exactly where your strength is at. We know what your capabilities are at on this particular movement in these rep ranges. There's no point in fucking around. You might as well just go all the way there, because if you don't, we just don't know where your abilities lie anymore. So just as far as like how I like to monitor progress, I think it becomes more difficult whenever I give someone a rep range and then I'm like, okay, just stay within that rep range. And as long as you're staying within that rep range, then we're good. Because I think that leaves a lot of room for performance decreases without necessarily being able to see the performance decrease in real time. If you're just aiming for a rep range, and let's say that you're hitting the top of that rep range and you're adding load, if the reps are falling week after week, but you're adding load, it's difficult to really see like where the performance markers are lying or where the recovery is at. Like, are you recovering from your prior training enough to continue to make progress on that movement? Or are the reps just falling as you're adding load and you're not necessarily improving? You're just continuing to basically hit the same performance just with a higher load and lower reps. So I understand top set, down set very, very well, or even just training to failure. I understand that line of thinking. It's so simple. I think that's the easy way of like kind of breaking it down, is like training to failure. It's there. You either do it or you don't, in theory. And if you're making progress, it's very easy to see, versus like, you know, what was said before. It's just, sometimes you'll see people train to reps and reserve and it's like, dude, that's it.
Right.
Like that was your set, really? But I think a good point to be made here, though, is like even something like a 2 RIR set visually should look fucking hard. Like, that shouldn't look easy by any means, depending on what we're talking about, right? If we're talking about pull-ups, yeah, dude, come on. Like, you don't need to leave 4 reps in reserve on pull-ups. But if we're talking about like, you know, an RDL, like a barbell RDL, and you're like, okay, 2 RIR with, you know, 600 pounds, fuck. That's really hard. If you start going beyond that point, it's like, all right, what is the risk versus reward for me taking a barbell RDL to failure? Like,
Greatness.
Well, so for me, it's like someone who is like really pushed some of these movement patterns extremely far, like the basically like the capabilities of, I mean, shit, I'm a good deadlifter. So like I've done some pretty crazy shit on like RDLs and good mornings and stuff like that. And there's a certain point where I'm like, man, I'd rather just do another set at like 3 RIR than try and take a top set to failure, because I'm like, I feel like if I try and do that, I'm going to be fucked. Like, there's just no way that I'm going to be able to do that.
That's a really interesting point too, because I think Tony alluded to it. But like coming out and saying like, if you're gonna train further away from failure, you simply have to do more sets.
Yeah,
because there's less meaningful repetitions being done within that single set. I've personally been playing with top set, down set, and like I said, for upper body work or like a lot of the single joint stuff, it's easy to find that point of like, okay, this is the most weight I can do for this many reps. But it's been a challenge. I've stayed away. Number one, I haven't had access to the equipment. And number two, like, it's kind of scary. Like, I'm not gonna lie. Like, I'll step under an 800-pound squat and I won't be scared. Put 12 plates on a leg press, and for some reason I'm terrified.
Yeah.
Even though there's a fucking stopper. So, like, I don't know.
It's the fear of like knowing how hard you actually have to push. It's not necessarily like a fear of injury. It's like, I think whenever you're working with like deadlifts and squats and things like that, there's a very real fear of getting hurt during that set. And I think that's more of like where most people's heads go to before.
It's funny. There's a juxtaposition there because I'm not afraid to get hurt on a squat. I'm
Really?
afraid to get hurt on leg press.
Really? Okay. So
I don't, maybe I'm weird. Are you, Tony, you've done hypertrophy training. You've done high level powerlifting. What's scarier?
I can see why it's scary for you because you're such a efficient squatter that movement just comes naturally to you because you've practiced it for 10 plus years, where leg press is new and you're not so much relying on yourself, but you're also relying on the manufacturer and praying to God that there's good equipment. But I know for a fact, I don't think any of them are scary, but for a fact, they're the most daunting is like a leg day for hypertrophy. Like that's the type of stuff where you're just going to the gym and you're just like, fuck, I can't believe I have to do this. And I think once you hit those points of like failure in training, like true failure, it makes it even more daunting. And that challenge, I think, is something to shoot for, to strive for, because there's not a lot of things that challenge us in our lives. And if we can make training the hardest thing in our life, then we have a pretty good life. And I think that, by finding those challenges and pushing yourself, it does create this conceptual idea of like going to the gym is very fulfilling in a lot of different ways beyond just, checking off the boxes, right? It's like I survived and I'm going to do it again next week. And it's making me stronger mentally and physically. And I think that there's a lot to be said with that. Now, does that work for everyone? I think that the delineation has to come between, are we talking about advanced athletes or are we talking about beginners? If we're talking about beginners, I think reps in reserve can be a fantastic way to progress someone as a beginner from a hypertrophy standpoint. I wouldn't give them a wide range of reps and reserves because their idea of failure is so untapped that if you just say reps in reserve of 1, they're still going to be 5 reps short of failure. But I think that's a good base point for a lot of beginners. But you're talking about advanced lifters, I think the failure becomes more important for them. So I think understanding the concept of who the audience is that you're talking to is very important. I think that gets missed in a lot of these discussions, right? I tend to look at more of the advanced lifters because that's what I prefer to work with. So everything that I come with is going to be geared more towards them in terms of conceptual ideas and things of that nature, right? If I have an advanced athlete saying, well, you just won't have it. You won't have an advanced athlete saying, I'm bored in the gym. Can we just do variation for the sake of variation, right? They don't get off on that. They get off on beating their logbook. They get off on pushing themselves in the gym. So like Bryce said, if there's an exercise that you find, and I think this happens to a lot of lifters, they find an exercise and they like, oh, this one feels really good, but I've done it for 8 weeks. So I have to switch it up to create this novel stimulus. Like, no, why would you do that? You found an exercise that works, just run it into the ground. And when you run it into the ground, start back up at 12 reps and run it back into the ground, right? And why not just continue to do that? Why do you need variation in exercises that you found to work and be super effective for you? I just don't believe in that terminology. And the thing that I don't like about what Bryce said when it comes to the RDL is like, I would just rather do another set, is that when do most injuries happen? When we start to accumulate a lot of volume and fatigue within those sets, right? So if we're trying to push another set of RDLs instead of just taking one set to failure, I think the likelihood of injury is going to come with that extra set and that extra volume, right? Most of the time when we get injured, it's not on our top sets. It's on some bullshit back down set that we were, doing set to 12 of, and like on rep 8, something pops. It's never on the top sets. You never see people get hurt on their top sets. It just doesn't happen because that's when you're the freshest, right? And I think that understanding that and understanding too the theory of exercise selection, not necessarily everything has to drive hypertrophy. You can pick exercises like a single leg split squat, doing a contralateral just to work on function of the anterior sling, right? And build some stability and some function within those movement patterns. So not everything has to be hypertrophy based, but I've trained with some really great bodybuilders. I've trained with Ben Bukolski on a daily basis, and he's Olympia. And when we fucking train and we like actually push and not bullshit like old men that we are, it's fucking scary, man. It is absolutely terrifying knowing that, like, when he's spotting me, it's like, okay, I'm good. Like, I can solely just focus on execution. And there's been points where my legs just quit working and he's just like, go again. And it's like, fuck, man, you better be holding on to this because I'm not coming back up on my own. But all I have to worry about is the execution of the movement. And I think, with hypertrophy training, there has to be things set in place to allow for failure to happen, right? So for you, Paul, setting the stoppers at a point where if you fail, you're still in a safe space. It's just about creating safety through failure. And I think that's what a lot of people have to conceptually put into place, right? If you're able to bottom out a hack squat, that's a safe failure point. If you're able to bottom out a leg press and not feel like you're in an awkward position, that's a safe failure point. So it's constantly trying to do that if you don't have a training partner. But if you have a training partner, then it's all about educating them on how helpful they can be within the hypertrophy training. But that's kind of the ideas, right? Like I don't like variation. If you find exercises that work and they feel great, just run them into the ground and just continue to undulate those rep ranges. And then I'm not a fan of adding volume for the sake of making up for missed opportunities in your top sets. I think that's going to lead to a little bit more fatigue and prone to injury. And I just don't like wasting time in the gym. I like just doing volume.
What are you in a rush for?
I got shit to do, man.
That's a good point, though. Like the accumulation of fatigue leading to injury is definitely a good point. I think it comes down again with that one to the level of athlete you're with and what movement you've chosen. Like for Bryce and RD, like I've watched his training, like not to sound creepy, a 600 RDL for this guy, like he's going to do it. I'm not. He's probably pretty proficient there. I'm not that proficient. So
yeah, well, I think a really good point here too is like whenever we're talking about like the advancement of the athlete that is performing the movement. So for me, taking something like an RDL is just a very base blanket example, but it's an example that I'm using because it is an injurious movement if taken too far, being very fatigued. And again, a second set at that weight and at that intensity is going to for sure be more injurious than a first set. Completely agree. I think that my main point here is that, as a relatively advanced athlete, I'm less worried about the lead up. I'm more worried about those last couple of reps whenever I'm very compromised. Like, my low back is fatigued, my hands and glutes are fatigued, my upper back is fatigued, my lungs are fatigued, my everything is just breaking on me one by one. It's like, can I get another rep? Maybe. Is that rep worth potentially fucking my low back up or something like that happening? It's like, I'd rather just rack it. And if that racking it makes me a pussy, then okay, that's fine. But
exactly what it makes you, Bryce.
Huge pussy. but like an RDL's of 6 plates. Pussy.
but at the same time, like I do firmly believe that a lot of this does come down to the athlete, but you have to, and you guys are good at this too, but like being able to educate your athletes on like how to auto-regulate whenever you feel shit in the moment.
That's a great point. Yeah.
Like if your progression tells you have to hit 600 pounds for 10 reps and you get to 6 reps and you're like, if I do one more rep, my low back is going to fucking explode. Don't go for another rep, like just don't do it. Like but that's in my opinion, part of why looking so hard at a logbook can be at times a little bit dangerous, right?
Definitely.
Because if we're in, not to be stereotypical, but fucking meatheads, man. Like they're not always the brightest people in the world. So whenever you look at numbers on a sheet and you're like, you know what, I have to do this regardless of how my body's feeling, I have to do it. And I've been there before too, where you're so caught up in progression. You're like, I have to do this no matter what. I have to beat these numbers. And there was a point in just for reference, in 2019, I had a day where I did snatch grip RDLs with 700 pounds for 3. And then I did a back down set with 550 for 12. And then I did good mornings with a cambered bar after that, 600 for 5, and then back down 500 for 8. and then I did one top set of leg press and I left. But like after that, I'd actually built up to that over like 8 weeks too. Like that was not just like bullshit. I walked in the gym doing it. That was like over 8 weeks. I built up to that, hadn't shifted my volume. And that day, I could barely get out of bed the next day.
And no shit. Did you write down that training day and be like, I fucking hate myself, I'm gonna do all of this?
But my point here though is like the first week I did those snatch grip RDLs, 6-7 RPE. I was sore as fuck the next day.
Yeah.
The next week I pushed a little bit further, sore as fuck, but like I slowly tapered it, and it was just like obviously those movements together, not the brightest, right? I understand that, totally get it. I was just doing some dumb shit. I felt like doing it.
Yeah, for sure.
But at the same time though, I think it's a really good example of like there are times whenever no matter what you do, no matter how conservatively you taper things up, there's just no amount of like going to failure that's going to be possible and that you're going to be able to recover from. Because again, these movements that I chose, not smart, I get it, totally get it. But it's just a blanket statement to make there. And I think that, you know, even with my advancement at the time, my strength level at the time, my calories being like 6,000 a day, my sleep being on point, like I still could not recover from that. So, and I mean, a lot of athletes aren't going to be able to recover from incredibly high stimulus like that. But
well, before you go on, sorry to interrupt, but that just kind of lends itself to my point a little bit, right? Like you started at a lower RPE and you've built yourself up and accumulated a ton of fatigue and volume to where you eventually broke, right? So that was an 8-week lead up to that. So that was the idea of lower volume building into higher volume, closer to failure. Whereas I would assume, and this is just an anecdotal assumption, if you just trained to failure on that first day, it wouldn't have broke you and you would have realized this is not the greatest exercise selection for me to do that, right? Because you would have been fresher in the beginning of your mesocycle, so you wouldn't have been as strong. So then you would have been able to do that, and you'd been like, okay, well, yeah, maybe I shouldn't lower back load and then leg press to probably a range of motion that pulls my pelvis from underneath me and loads my lower back even more, right? So, I mean, everything has a juxtaposed idea to it,
it's but to me, take, right?
Yeah. So I totally get where your position is there. I think that again, that specific movement selection is just very, very case dependent. But using any exercise, you can plug and play however you want to. If I were to go to failure on, but that was 3 exercises, 5 total working sets. We can extrapolate that however we want to over the course of a lower body day. There are always going to be movements that are very fatiguing, that you can push very, very close to failure. You can push that even on the machines, like leg press, pendulum squat, whatever else you want to use. But let's say I got 8 weeks of progression out of that.
Yep.
If I were to go to failure on week 1, do I even get to week 3? Like that's more long.
I don't think you would want to with those exercises.
Well, no, and I'm not. Right. Yeah, I'm not even necessarily like blanketing it.
I think what Tony was getting at those, like, especially if you start with like a higher rep range, you have like infinite amounts of progression to go from. For sure. But I don't think, like, taking into account the little amount of motor learning that would take place on a hack squat or a machine, like an externally stabilized machine, even if you stayed at 12 reps, you'd still be able to add weight at that failure point for multiple weeks before you had to drop the reps. You know, so there's an argument to be made for both sides. I tend to think that for an advanced athlete, I would probably tend on Tony's side, whereas like I would love to say that I only train advanced athletes, but that's simply not the case. Hopefully we take them to a point where they are advanced, right? And the approach changes. And I love it. We've kind of all come to the same point of like finding movements that work best. Like Tony and I had a great conversation that we posted last week with with Stuart Locke about specificity, like primarily relating to powerlifting. But we talked about, like, if the movement of the squat has to be performed in the competition. So the more time you can spend squatting, the better you're going to be at squatting. Well, if you find a movement that you find a great connection with and you can load really hard and you can progress, well, fucking stay with it. Just keep pushing as hard as you can.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I actually do have a question. So with intensity being this blanket failure point at all times, how are you manipulating frequency within that of a body part? Are we talking, like, let's say you do a really, really hard lower body day, and I don't know however many exercises you would program within that, however many working sets you program in within that. I would imagine that's very individual specific.
Mm-hmm.
But what kind of frequency would you typically be looking at? I mean, are we talking like once every like week, or maybe 2 sessions a week?
Yeah.
And within that, do you feel like it would be beneficial in any capacity to potentially pull back the absolute intensity, the average intensity per set a little bit to accommodate more frequency within that week for an advanced athlete, especially a bodybuilder?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Mhm.
And it comes down to me again, is like, are we reducing things to get more for the sake of that? We think the idea of getting more is better and more beneficial. Then the answer would be no, I wouldn't want to do that. As you get stronger, your frequency is going to be less and less because your recovery is going to be harder and harder to come by. So if you're someone who is not as strong and you're just starting off and you can recover, and by recover it means you're able to progress with what structure you have set in place, a higher frequency is going to lend itself to seeing better results as long as the stimulus is there every single time. So that would be that you're training to failure and pushing those exercises that are properly selected. And exercise selection is a huge thing when it comes to hypertrophy training, for the instance that you've brought up, right? With the RDLs, good mornings, and leg press. It's like, if I'm doing a stiff leg deadlift or an RDL or a good morning as my main movement, the rest of the day probably would limit lower back loading. I would do more chest supported rows and lat pull downs and things like that. So that way there's not a continuation of lower back load and lower back loading, right? External stability is going to drive stimulus better with hypertrophy. So when it comes to frequency, yeah, more is going to be better, but not at the sake of doing less optimal training to get there. So if you're someone that's really strong, I found that training legs maybe every 5th to 6th day is optimal. So they may do like a push, pull, off, legs, off, and then just repeat that cycle so that they're doing legs on that 5th or 6th day again. So you're kind of doing 1 to 1.5 times frequency per week, depending on where that lands. Sometimes it could be 2. So that would be something that you want to think about. The stronger the person is on whatever exercises they do is going to determine that, and also where their weaknesses are as well, right? So if I have someone who has weak legs and they have a leg day in and of itself, and then maybe they need to build up their quads, I might have them do a leg extension on their pull day, right? Because it's not going to affect their pull workout. And if they do 1 or 2 top sets of leg extensions, that can be a little bit more volume. That's not as injurious as they wouldn't do like an extra, hack squat. They would just do something that you're allowed to push the volume really hard on those things without accumulating a ton of fatigue. So it depends. It's very person dependent, but I found that the stronger you are, the less frequency you're going to have, and the weaker you are, the more frequency you're going to have. The biggest thing is that you're able to recover before each session and beat the logbook, as long as you don't compromise the execution of the movement. For the sake of beating the logbook is the thing that I always try to preach to people.
Yeah, I would tend to side with Tony. Like, I would try. I don't have any like physique specific clients. So this is coming more so from like a powerlifting perspective. Say someone is benching twice a week. I would try to get the most out of those 2 days. And then if I found that they were recovering well from as much realistic work as they could do within those 2 days, I would split some of that volume into a 3rd day, but I would never sacrifice the output on those other 2 days.
Right.
And then once I got to that 3rd day, so like say I was doing we'll just say 6 working sets total split between 2 days, which is quite low. I would just add that third day, but still have 6 total working sets within my week. And then I would maximize that. And then if I wanted to increase another day, I could do that. But the frequency would never come at the expense of execution. But when you do have either a lighter athlete, a less experienced athlete, a weaker athlete, because each session isn't as taxing, you can still have them push to those high level executions and have them recover between sets, because each, like using, the cliche example of like each set's like blunt force trauma, right? So if I'm getting in a car crash with a bike versus getting in a car crash with an 18-wheeler, one's gonna be a little bit easier to recover from than the other. So like someone like, I have a couple 800-pound deadlifters. They're deadlifting every 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Whereas I have some, lighter females deadlifting 2, even one deadlifts 3 times a week. So it varies.
I completely agree with you. And I think that same mentality, like
Mhm.
exactly what Tony was just saying, applies to physique sports as well, and applies to bodybuilding. The same principles apply across the board. It doesn't matter what your goals are. If you're a bigger, stronger athlete that is capable of taking sets closer and beyond failure, you're going to need more recovery always. I think my not necessarily like, because I'm not disagreeing in any capacity. I think this is just a difference in methodologies slightly, but I think that we're, for the most part, along the exact same line. And I totally agree with what you're saying. My perspective here would be not necessarily to do more for the sake of doing more. It's about how can we get closer to optimal. And if getting closer to optimal allows or basically dictates that we do another session a little bit closer to the last, but we lower the absolute, or I guess like the average intensity per set to accommodate that, then I'll go with that. Basically, like what we talked about, if we're working with advanced athletes, if you tell them to do another session, they'll be like, okay, I'll do it, because they know that to do it or to get where they want to be, they're basically doing what they need to do. So if we're getting 100% of our possible stimulus taking every set to failure within one session, but if we get 80% leaving X amount of reps in reserve on each set, but the reps in reserve model allows us to train every 3 days, but the failure allows us to train every 5th day, and we're getting 80% of that 100% stimulus, eventually that's going to surpass the 100% and less frequent model. So where do we, and obviously those numbers are made up. Those are complete,
but it helps to conceptualize, right?
Those are complete made up conceptual numbers, but at the same time, we don't know how much more stimulating a set to failure is than a 2 RIR set. Obviously, if we're talking about a curl, that's very different than a leg press, like our original example here. I personally would speculate that a set to 2 RIR on a leg press is pretty fucking close to a set to complete failure if we're talking 10 plus reps on a leg press. I think that the fatigue cost there, and just like the psychological cost, is going to be probably beyond the actual stimulation that you're going to get. That would be my own personal guess.
So the question I would have back to you would be, so you're essentially banking on the fact that increased frequency, assuming total volume of workload was equated,
right?
Increased frequency would have a bigger impact than having it all on one day.
So I think part of this as well is assuming that the intensity is lower. We're assuming also that we can increase the volume.
Okay.
So I think that's another big driver here as well, is that we understand that volume and intensity are both the most important variables here. We understand that. Most people understand that whenever it comes to hypertrophy, those are going to be the 2 big drivers. Everybody always argues, no one can come to any kind of consensus about which one is more important. One crowd is, and typically it's more of like the science-based research crowd, but ironically, like Tony, you guys are very, very science-based, but Tony's more along the lines of like intensity. But I personally would speculate that intensity is probably more important. Just personally, anecdotally, from what I've experienced, from what I've seen, I would speculate that it's probably more hypertrophy is probably more dependent on how hard you can train versus how frequently or how much you can train.
Yeah.
Because I think that's more person to person dependent. I don't think many people can actually train that hard, to be honest. So my main thing here is I also do place a lot of stock in volume. I do think that volume is important. I probably put more stock in it than a lot of quote unquote like intensity based coaches do. Whereas I'm probably falling in more along the lines of some very strange middle ground where not many people occupy. But having said that, I think that my conceptual idea of how to interplay intensity, volume, and frequency is probably very different than like Tony's, because Tony's, your model is, at least in my understanding of it, is very intensity driven, almost 100% intensity driven, and then everything else kind of trails along behind that.
Yeah, that's a good way to sum it
So,
up.
so in just the way that I conceptualize these things, I think that having not all of them on an even playing field, but having each one have its own stock in 100% of hypertrophy, I think is an interesting way of looking at it as well. And I think that you can take it beyond just intensity, volume, and frequency. I think you can take it into even more like secondary and tertiary variables as well, like rest and, relative load on the bar and things like that. Even density of training, I think all of these things can start to compound and add up. But just the general, I guess, question and clarification I would want, I know this is running over, I apologize, guys.
No.
But
Speak.
yeah, but just how you would go about potentially that conundrum of what if lowering the absolute intensity would lead to the ability to train more often and also with more volume. And do you think that could potentiate more growth long term?
Yeah, so that's a great question. If you think that volume, an increase in volume is the biggest driver of hypertrophy, like a lot of people do, then that would make sense. The question would be, one, is 2 reps in reserve enough for you to be able to come back in 3 days and do another session effectively? Or is that 2 reps in reserve so deleterious that you're not able to come back in 3 days and perform at a high level? And your 2 reps in reserve on that third day is more like you're training at 80% of capacity instead of 100% capacity. So for me, as a coach working with an athlete, I want them to come into each training session as close to 100% capacity as possible. So if they can do that, then I would have to think, well, what are we sacrificing to do that just to reach a higher frequency? It may be closer to 3 or 4 reps in reserve. And then I would have to argue that maybe that's too little of a stimulus to drive adaptation just for the sake of accruing a bunch more volume. Is volume going to help drive muscle hypertrophy over progressing a logbook and taking things closer to failure? That's a question that I don't think there's an answer to. I think science would lend itself to saying it's a volume thing. I think a lot of people that read the science would say that, but there's not a lot of science on well-trained athletes. It's mostly on untrained athletes. And some of the models that they use are so fucking ridiculous that no one would be able to survive that training for longer than the 4 weeks or something like. So it's hard. I
completely agree. Yep.
Yeah, it's hard to say. It's going to be person dependent, and it's also going to be psychological profile as well.
Yep.
Right? If you tell someone who's an advanced athlete, leave 2 reps in the tank and you never get to kind of push to failure, that could create a bit of a problem. So the idea would be that are you staying at 2 reps in reserve for the entire training cycle, or you eventually get into failure?
Yeah. Oh, do you want me to answer you?
Yeah.
Okay. So just, this was just a complete conceptual example. But I do think that I want to what I would say is that would be an average, right? That would just be an average is 2 hours. And I use that basically as like, that's close enough to failure to what we would all consider a pretty heavy stimulus.
Yep.
It's hard training, and it's far enough away from failure at the same time to where it's not going to be inducing the same fatigue costs, in my opinion. It's still going to be very fatiguing work, but it's not going to be quite the same as going to that concentric failure point, which is kind of my main point here.
Well, so I'm of the notion as well that, okay, so say we've maximized one training session a week, we're doing X amount of volume. Let's just use a number like 8 sets.
Yeah.
Eight total sets to failure. If I was to split that in 2 days and say, we're going to do 4 sets on one day, 4 sets on the other. If you're not digging the hole as deep, you don't have as far to climb out of it.
Mm-hmm.
So assuming that we could recover well enough to perform at our 100% capacity on that second day, it would stand to reason that if you had 2 days where you're training at 100% capacity, but at a lower volume in each one, you could start to increase the number of working sets total per week, but split between 2 days. The question then becomes, is the frequency the driver? Like, is 2 80% hits?
Yeah.
Or let's say 70% of your total recoverability. So like, I only train to my 70% recoverability on 2 separate days. Am I getting more stimulus than if I train 100% on one day? 70 plus 70 is 140, just for those math wizards.
Yeah, you can't math like that. That's bullshit. That doesn't even count.
No, but like, I'm just throwing numbers out there because who knows?
Yeah.
Right. From a powerlifting perspective, when you're dealing with, barbell movements that have much higher neurological components, much more like motor learning components, yeah, if you can train more frequently on those movements, it stands to reason that you would progress more. But if we're looking solely at hypertrophy, I don't know the answer.
No.
So it's 2 different models.
Yeah.
The question of, so I attacked that in a different way than Bryce did. Bryce, you essentially said, I'm going to do a little bit more volume when I separate the days, but I'm going to make that volume slightly less intensive. And then over time, I'm going to raise the intensity.
Go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
Did I make a mistake?
So what I was going to say is I think that you could take that either way. I think that you could, and I think that's what you're about to say.
Yeah.
Is that I think that you could split that session essentially, and you could reduce the intensity initially.
Yep.
You could even bring the volume down to where it would be equal to the volume of the single day. Mm-hmm. But in theory, you're breaking it up so you can do a little bit more in each session.
Right.
But
that's what I was getting at for sure.
Yeah.
You maximize the one session, you bring it over, both days are maximal intensity, and then you bring up the volume. Whereas you're saying, well, if you're going to split it, bring down the intensity, bring up the volume, and then bring up the intensity. So it's just the same thing, just I came at it one way, you came at it the back way.
And I think another point here, and just another point, and I'm really not arguing for my model necessarily. I think I'm just more so putting forward like conceptual thoughts and allowing us to talk through them, because it is a nice conversation either way.
We are as well. Like one thing that I should say is, like, for me, I want people, when they listen to our podcast, when they, subscribe to Coach's Corner and watch our videos, these types of questions, if we're disagreeing on something, but we both have a conceptual background for why it might be correct, it leaves the listener with better questions to ask. And that's what we want, that seeking information. So a conversation like this, where we haven't really dove into the hypertrophy conversation much, like, this is a lot of really great information for people to listen to. So, like, dive in, man.
Well, I don't mean to even like plug myself at all, but
please do.
It's a very kind of coincidental time that we're having this conversation, because on Instagram I have a business page, and I've been for the past like 6 weeks doing a series, and the series is basically comparing training variables and how they relate to other training variables, and how the linear increase of one over time will affect the other one. So volume, intensity, frequency, relative load, density, rest periods. I have even like pretty graphs that I made on PowerPoint. They're not that pretty.
Oh, nice.
But yeah, no, it's just because I do enjoy like the conceptual thinking within this. And I think that the more you can the more that you can understand, or we can understand the conceptual side of these things, the more that we can logically talk our way through. And what you notice is that we're all basically saying the same shit. We just have different approaches in how we're getting there. Whereas my point here would be, I tend to put a little bit more stock into total volume. But I don't necessarily think that putting more stock into intensity is wrong at all. I think that even the athlete that you're working with could dictate which way you go with that too. I think that we all have athletes that we understand don't necessarily train as hard as we'd like them to train. And you might have to compensate with that, with a little bit more volume in their training. I don't think that's necessarily wrong if you can't get someone to take every set to failure. And just another general point that I would make as well is, whenever you do split training up, you're able to keep your intensity higher within every set a little bit better. I have seen training programs from coaches that are more along the lines of very high intensity, train to failure every set. And, they'll have a lower body day that has 12 working sets in it. And I'm looking at that and I'm like, well, and this is a very extreme example, right? But I'm looking at that and I'm like, if we just split that up, 6 sets one day, 6 sets another day, we would be able to maintain or improve our performance and our intensity much, much, much more effectively. And you're not taking 8 days to recover from that single session either. So whereas the recovery aspect of that large bolus of a hit it's significant on its own. In a vacuum, it's very significant. But whenever you look at the factors that get it to that point, I think that we can potentially break those down a little bit better. And that's more along the lines of what I'm saying here, is that I think that there are times whenever we could break it into like a second day a little bit more frequently. And that could potentiate more volume and even a higher absolute intensity that we're training at, because the intensity that we're training at in our latter sets of the training day aren't being affected by the ones at the beginning of the session.
Yeah. My only pushback on that would be if you have someone that's, say you have those 12 exercises and you do 6 and 6. We all know that the first exercises are going to be probably compound movements, and then the last exercises are probably going to be isolation movements. So then it would be the idea of splitting that up effectively so that the exercise selection actually matches the criteria that you're trying to do. So say if you do hack squats on day 1, right? And then you're fresh and you do that and you're really, really strong. So you're 8-plate hack squatter. And then instead of going into leg press a little fatigued and doing a little bit less, you save that for the next day. And then you come in and you're fresh for a leg press session where you're able to do exponentially more. Would that create a higher likelihood of injury than if you just did it all in one session? Would be my only pushback, right? It's like you're doing heavy compound movements in the beginning of an exercise and you're spreading that volume out so that you can do more heavy compound movements on the other day. Because I don't think a day with just isolation type movements would be as effective. Or you could do it with metabolite training. Like I know with fortitude training, they'll do a upper body day that's heavier followed by, or with a lighter pump set lower body day. So there's a lot of variables to it. But if the idea is to train heavy on both days, I think that would compromise a lot of really strong lifters, right? Like if I'm able to do a hack squat with 7 plates, the idea of coming back 3 days later and having to do a leg press with 15 just because I'm fresh doesn't necessarily sit too well with my ability to like have my joints feeling good and have a higher recovery stimulus and things of that nature. That would be the only pushback. I do see what you're getting at, and conceptually there's a lot of very good validity to it. But I just choose to personally try to get everything done in one day, because then it also comes down to, and I know the research would say as long as volumes equate it'll produce the same results, but something in me tells me that if you're able to train and accumulate a bunch of really good volume in one day where you're doing mechanical tension, then you're following that up with metabolite buildup and you're really pushing things, is that going to be better to do every 5 days than opposed to not doing that and doing it every, I don't know. It's a great idea. And it's a great thing to talk about a little bit more if we had more time, but that would be my only pushback on that is you're increasing the risk of pushing things to a higher level more often. right? If I'm a 700-pound squatter and I have to squat 600 pounds on Monday and then have to squat 550, 600 pounds on Thursday, that's going to be very, very tough to do, right? So
that'll be a no for me, dog.
Well, I think within that, kind of going back to the original point that you made like an hour ago, was doing the failure style of training. The one set to failure is with advanced athletes meant to be less injurious. And in my opinion, moving that heavier work that would potentially be at the later stages of your session, while you're not going to be as fatigued, so you can use more weight, which might make it a little bit more injurious. You're also going to be fresher mentally, so you'll be more focused.
There's truth to that.
There's trade-offs, man.
So there are trade-offs. And I think also, like, if you're just looking at it as like at like a physiological level, you're using more load, you're getting more mechanical tension, you're getting more reps, you're getting more volume load. In theory, if you're recovering from that, you should be able to adapt from that and grow more, right? That's my opinion.
Yeah, no, and
Stay
research
healthy.
would back that up for sure. There's a lot of validity to that statement. But we all know that conceptually things on paper sound great, but
Yep.
maybe in real world practicality, it doesn't ever match up. So it's something to play with, right?
Yep.
If you can do higher frequency and train balls to the wall and get away with it, do that, right? But you have to understand recoverability, and your ability to progress session to session is the most important thing, right? If you have a higher frequency and you can only train 3 weeks before you have to deload because the frequency is too high, whereas if you had a lower frequency and you're able to train 12 weeks of really hard training, you know, that there's a trade-off to everything. You just have to find what works in your paradigm and what works to allow you to progress. And that's why all these conceptual ideas is very important for people to just kind of pick and choose, because I don't think there's a wrong or right answer to say 100% the truth is, right? It's just psychologically, what do you jive with? And then what are you able to make progress with? And then you just ride that out. I think we can all agree that variation for the sake of variation is not a good way to approach training. If you find an exercise that works really good for you and you have a good connection, push that. External stability is going to be better when training for hypertrophy as opposed to internal stability. And then from there, it's like, there's a lot of nuance that we have to figure out for each individual client and athlete. If there's more to be said, we can have another show, but as of right now, this is going to be it for today. We appreciate you guys for listening. If you enjoy the podcast, go to iTunes and leave a review and a 5-star rating. We're still doing the giveaway. So if you guys leave a review, you'll get a month free for the best review of Coach's Corner University. So make sure you guys go and leave a review at Coach's Corner on iTunes. And Bryce, do you have anything you want to plug before you jump off?
I could probably plug myself, but I'm not going to. It's fine.
No, man, plug yourself.
If you guys want to learn more about Bryce and his coaching, follow his page, follow his business page. He is a great thinker. He is creative with his thought process, and he doesn't speak in black and white. And that's the thing that we're always trying to find with great coaches and great athletes, right? So check him out, give him a follow, and we appreciate your time, Bryce. Thank you so much, man.
Of course. Thank you, guys.